Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Responsible AI Report, where we are speaking with some of the leading experts in responsible AI. I am very excited. We have Betty Louie joining us today. Betty, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me, Patrick.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights today. You have, of course, an extensive background in technology and AI. Working, currently with the Brand Tech Group as well. And there's so much happening in the space, as always, but I feel like, especially recently, just with regards to AI regulation and the future of it, what it's looking like globally. Of course, there was a CNBC news article that came out recently about global AI regulation. And it was talking about how it's set to kind of shift in 2025 with, of course, the EU implementing very strict rules with regards to AI, while the US now under President Trump and advisor Elon Musk, as well as the UK pursuing more of a lighter approach to AI development. And all of this is kind of embodied in this AI race between the US and China as well. We're seeing different regulatory approaches emerging globally from the EU, the US, the UK, and beyond. And as someone focused on responsible AI guidelines, Betty, how should companies operating internationally start by developing their AI governance frameworks to stay compliant across these various jurisdictions? Because I imagine it could be quite confusing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a question that gets posed all the time, not just brand tech, but all different types of companies. The landscape is very piecemeal right now across jurisdictions as to how different countries and even different regions are approaching AI and what regulatory compliance should be in place. And of course, the law really often shows what the society wants, right? Or what the society wants to encourage. So you see certain countries which might take a certain position, a regulatory position on AI compliance because they are really pushing innovation. And other jurisdictions or other regions are taking a much more conservative approach because while they want to encourage innovation, they're also very concerned about AI as a whole, and they want to have certain guardrails in place from the beginning. So it's the way we approach it at Brand Tech, but also the way I would encourage companies to approach it in light of this fragmented regulatory framework, across the world, is if a company is operating internationally, but even within the US, because even if you're only looking at the US, it's all different state laws. So it's the same piecemeal puzzle that companies are looking to navigate. I always say, first, you really have to look at it as what is your own internal regulatory framework, or what is your own approach to AI? Because it's too difficult as a company to just follow the law and have that be your North Star. Your North Star should first be, and especially with respect to AI, think about what is it that you want to do with AI? What tools do you want to use? What are your own guidelines on confidentiality? What are your own frameworks? What is your own AI policy? You have to have some sort of internal approach to it first. And the more robust it is, the better. And you have to have teams that are able to evaluate it, not just from a legal side, not just from a technical side, but from data security, from InfoSec, from a commercial end. It has to be a multidisciplinary team. But once you have your own internal principles of how you want to approach AI, how you're looking to scale AI use, it will provide an excellent framework. You then would take, or what I would suggest, you then take all the different regulatory frameworks in place. You look to see which markets you're currently operating in, what markets you're currently selling in, and you look to see which ones have the strictest laws. Because you would want to, let's say, if you know that you do sell to the EU, if you are in the EU, or even if you're not in the EU, but if you sell your products in the EU, you could be captured under the EU AI Act. That is arguably the strictest one right now, if you have to look broadly. So then you might say, okay, we have to analyze what we have against that. And then you look to certain jurisdictions then to add on to it, depending on what your business use case is. But I wouldn't recommend doing that second piece first if you don't have your own principles in place, because your principles, your AI principles, is basically the company's spine as to how you're approaching AI. And once you have that set up, it's actually an easier lift to be compliant with even the EU AI Act, which has relatively stringent policies, because you might need to uplift certain things, but you're not starting from scratch and you're not so beholden to designing your compliance based on one law. You're designing your compliance based on your own internal principles, and then you're modifying it to make it compliant with the areas that you need, with the jurisdictions that you most need to be. And then it's actually easier to keep up with all the international regulations that happen, especially if you look to the stricter laws from the beginning. If you look to the stricter laws that you're subject to already from the beginning, then you're able to kind of scale down or just deal with variations. So I do find that that's an easier way to approach it, but it really first starts with the principles. You have to have certain principles in place, even on transparency, things like that. How much do you tell the client? What is your approach to telling a client on use of AI? What is your internal policy on use of AI for even your own employees? Very fundamental things like that, but you will see a lot of the regulations, they also touch on all of these same notions. So if you've done the work internally on your own principles, you will see some of it blend out for the internal regulations.
Yeah, Betty, you make a really good point about organizations thinking about how they're going to use AI within their operations, their policies, procedures, because every company is going to be using AI differently. And I love how you talked about just the importance of putting an AI policy in place so as to lay this foundation that will really prepare you no matter what the regulation ends up becoming. In a lot of ways, you kind of answered my next question that I had for you. I would love for you to maybe dive even a little bit deeper. You talked about compliance. And of course, this is a big challenge that a lot of organizations are facing in their AI implementation with a lot of this fragmented AI regulation coming out. What do you believe are some immediate steps that companies should take to ensure compliance while also preparing for potential federal oversight under a new administration? I mean, I know you discussed the importance of having AI policies in place, but is there anything that goes beyond that, at least at this stage?
So, I think with the new administration, I think what we're going to see is that AI it's a new administration, but they've already articulated their AI plans. I think AI is going to be emphasized and accelerated even more than it is under this new administration. I'm not sure there will be federal regulations in place of to really, in similar lines to, let's say, an EU AI Act. I don't see federal regulations being rolled out under this administration just yet in the same broad scope that the EU AI Act has had. So, having said that, in terms of how a company can really work with AI tools and what they want to do, is one, I think there has to be a reality check on whether or not a company wants to address or addresses the use of AI tools. Is the fact is people are using AI tools for their own work, right? So there's internal work like productivity, or what I consider productivity, and then there's also client work, right? So regardless of whether a company wants to admit it or not, or has a use for a client use for AI tools, the reality is, I would say, a lot of employees are probably using AI tools, whether a company knows about it or not. So, from a company's compliance perspective, I would say get ahead of it. Talk to them about the AI tools that they can use. We go through a green listing process. So, we actually actively evaluate a huge number of AI tools across a whole bunch of different terms and conditions and, against a lot of different criteria. And we put in a list as to which tools are you are able to use, which are green, which are for green listed. You're able to use it internally, but you're also able to use it for outside facing work. Then there are amber tools that we consider they are work that they're tools that you can use for internal use, but not for public facing work. And then there are red listed tools that you shouldn't touch at all, whether it's for your own work or for any basis. So it's more of like a reality check. I feel like a lot of companies do just need to articulate. I'm sure people are considering using AI tools. Some of you are already using AI tools. Here is what's permissible and here what isn't. And then you build on it from there. You build in what are your ethical procedures. You build in what is your transparency. You build in what's the AI group that comes together to evaluate how things are used. You decide, how do you talk to clients about it? How do you talk to a board about your use of AI, and how do you mitigate risk around AI and the use of certain AI tools? And that's all part of how a company approaches AI and using AI and scaling AI, especially in the midst of what's going on with the new administration. The new administration has already said, okay, I'm investing this much, or these companies are investing, what is it, like 500 billion? It's a huge number, right? On, AI initiatives. So if a company is looking to really use AI and scale AI against this backdrop, then yeah, a lot of things need to go into place as to, again, what I call the internal principles of the company. But it's having those things in place, like having a type of green list, will really accelerate, and a company would really be able to scale the use of AI, but in a compliant and with the proper guardrails. Right. Having said that, is the AI terms continuously change, and the AI's landscape is moving really quickly. You know that, you see that. And so when you're looking at these principles, it's never a one and done. You're constantly looking to refresh it. You're constantly looking to look at the new tools, look at the new capabilities. AI capabilities are just moving at such a breakneck speed right now. It's like, it's the more the team has the principles in place, the more you're able to have a very sophisticated dialogue as to, well, what's our position on this type of tool, or what's our position on this type of use of AI? And then you're able to continuously build on that. And then it would be aligned with what's going on with the scale and the acceleration of AI use, but within certain guardrails, and you have certain procedures in place.
Yeah, yeah, I really believe that that's essential because I feel like once you have those guardrails in place, I believe then you're able to more fully embrace the technology as it continues to advance. As you well know, the speed of AI development is really outpacing the regulatory frameworks that are coming out worldwide, and it really becomes this balancing act of, okay, should we embrace AI innovation, or should we be mindful of regulation and kind of having these guardrails in place? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, just based on your work with companies managing AI risks. What do you see are the most critical self-regulatory measures businesses should implement now rather than waiting for government regulations to catch up?
Yeah, I think that it's any company now, as a good practice, should have the self regulations. Whether you call it self regulations or internal principles, internal approach to AI, I think that's critical. I think the fundamentals are figure out what tools people are using, figure out how to use it, figure out what your risk appetite is to a certain extent. It aligns with certain principles, like certain companies might say, I only want to use or I only want to work with tools that have licensed and cleared images, meaning that they've compensated, they've entered into agreements with the underlying content creators or the photographers or the artists, and they've compensated that. That's an internal company principle that then gets rolled out, because then that determines which tools are being used, in addition to different criteria that you would analyze. But first, a company needs to come up with some of those self-regulatory framework as to how to go about it, or it could be dealing with ethical approaches, right? AI tools are getting so sophisticated now that oftentimes it's very difficult to discern if something is an AI generated image or if it's a real person, right? Or a real photograph. 9 months ago, it was pretty obvious. Now it's getting less obvious. And I'm sure in 6 months, it will be completely undiscernible. You take certain positions on, if you're creating diverse images, who is in the room to analyze that? Do you have somebody of that same background as the image you're coming in to make sure that certain blind spots, certain sensitivities are taken into account? That's a company decision, again, based on their own internal self regulations or their own principles as to how they want to do it. There might be other guardrails in terms of transparency. When you're using AI, how much do you disclose to the counterparty or even internally that AI is being used? How do you identify that AI has been used in it, or AI has been partially used, or you've used AI for the initial phases? So there are certain things that, let's say, a company should put in place as to how they want the company to, also principles that the company wants to stand behind, right? Does the company want to go in and come out and say, we are transparent when we're using AI? But in order to be able to make that statement, you have to roll out certain internal self-regulations. So those are just some of the examples. I think having a multidisciplinary committee, or not committee, but a group that really focuses on that is a very fast, efficient way of accelerating some of that. And I don't mean a committee like, oh my God, you have to meet up with them once a week if you want to do certain things, but the committee that is really nimble and able to converse very fluidly on all the emerging technology coming out, but really able to first lay the proper foundation for the company as to how, what are the internal self-regulations? What are the internal principles on the use of AI, whether it's for client use or whether it's for the team's own day-to-day work?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like with so much what you're saying as well is that at the end of the day, it really is about intentionality and how are these organizations using AI and setting themselves up for success so that they don't run into those legal and compliance issues down the road, and being able to have a specific strategy around AI. And that's why, just as an ecosystem, we're very fortunate to have people like you, Betty, who really work alongside organizations to figure this out. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us today, and not only for joining us for the Responsible AI report, but also your work and commitment in the AI space. It's clear just from our conversation that this is something that you care deeply about. And so very excited to be able to have you on the show to talk about it. Before we part ways, I'm just wondering if you could share with our listeners where they could find out more information about you and your work.
Yeah. Well, first I want to thank you, Patrick, for this time and these wonderful questions. And Responsible AI Institute is a leader in this space, and this space is a a really rapidly developing space. So it is important to keep responsible AI as a top of mind discussion as technology continues to develop. Where you can find more of my works is, on my LinkedIn post, the Brand Tech Group. We also have a list of different articles or different podcasts that I've been on in this space. But this is something that we keep tightly abreast of, because it's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. It's work that we actively do in the AI space, and responsible AI is a cornerstone of that.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure to include those various links in our show description. So for our viewers or listeners out there, all you have to do is scroll down, click those links provided. Betty, thank you so much again for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's been a pleasure.